We'll call this meeting of the Urbana Plan Commission to order. In the absence of the chair, an acting chair needs to be selected, and so I'll ask for any nominations.
I nominate Mr. Ackerson to be chair.
I second.
All in favor? I think we need a roll call on this, do we? Okay, can we take a voice vote? If we can take a voice vote, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed other than me? That was a joke. I'm fine with it. That's the way we're going to roll today, folks. Ask the recording secretary to call the roll. So, Madam Recording Secretary, would you please?
Mr. Ackerson,
Present.
Ms. Billman,
Here.
Mr. Fell,
Here.
Mr. Fitch, Mr. Hopkins, Ms. Wadrago,
Here.
Mr. Storr, Mr. Trail, and Mr. Turner.
We have 5 members present, so we have a quorum. Staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, if we could remove the study session, item number 11, the preview of the proposed Champaign County Nursing Home plat, please.
Okay. And that's been withdrawn?
Just asked to be removed from tonight's
From
agenda.
tonight, okay. The minutes from the October 5th, 2017 regular Plan Commission will be presented for approval at the next regular meeting, so we're not going to be reviewing or approving those tonight. Are there any written communications?
None other than what's before you that we'll announce during the public hearing.
Okay. There are no continued public hearings, and there is no old business. So I'm going to review the procedures for a public hearing for the members of the audience. The chairperson opens the public hearing. Staff will then present a summary of the case. The petitioner outlines their request and presents evidence. Other proponents, people speaking for, may present evidence. People opposing may present evidence and may ask questions of the petitioner. Then others may be heard who wish to be heard. Staff may make additional comments or clarification. The petitioner then may offer a rebuttal. And I would note, these are not arguments. This is simply a rebuttal to what's already been mentioned. The petitioner may present a summary of his or her petition. And then we close the public part, and the Plan Commission discusses the case and votes on the case. So we're looking at Plan Case number 2314 PUD 17 and 2318 PUD 17, which is a request by Pierre Moulin, is that right, Moulin? For preliminary and final approval of a residential planned unit development for 1404 South Lincoln Avenue from Section 13-3 of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance. Mr. Garcia, you ready to present?
Okay, good evening. Thank you all for coming. Before I actually dive into the details of the case, I wanted to go through exactly what a PUD is and the purpose of a PUD. We don't see too many of them here at Plan Commission, so I figured just as a little background it might be good to explain the purpose of the PUD and then how a PUD is different from other cases like a rezoning. So the purpose of a PUD, let's see, and I believe this is detailed in the memo as well. But the purpose statement, if you're following along at home, this is on page 233 of your zoning ordinance, section 13.3b. So the purpose statement says that the purpose of a planned unit development is to encourage development that goes beyond the minimum zoning and development standards in terms of design, public amenities, innovative green construction, and implementation of the comprehensive plan and other official development plans and policies. In exchange for public amenities, developers are granted flexibility in applying the typical zoning and development regulations. These amenities may include bicycle trails, public art, unique architecture, protection of natural resources, green design and building, or higher density and mixed-use development. For developers, flexibility allows more creative development that encourages infill development, provides a wider variety of housing choices, or meets a market niche. In all planned unit developments, the final built form shall be generally consistent with the goals, objectives, and future land uses of the Urbana Comprehensive Plan and other relevant plans and policies. So that is the purpose of a planned unit development. And ways that planned unit developments differ from a rezoning, let's say, is that PUDs are really project specific, whereas rezoning is not really bound by a specific project. And PUDs allow the city to add certain conditions to a proposal, whereas a rezoning does not allow you to add conditions. And really, the trade-off that's made in a PUD is that whereas a city can add conditions, then the developer can get some flexibility, as I just described a little bit in that purpose statement. So you can allow some flexibility in our zoning ordinance regulations for a PUD. For example, like in this case, to reduce the number of required parking spaces, to reduce setbacks, and things of that nature. Okay. And another point that I'd like to make is that you notice that we have two cases in front of us, and this is for preliminary and for final approval of a planned unit development. In certain cases, we do allow concurrent review of planned unit developments, both the preliminary and the final at the same time, and that is the case here. So we have two cases, but the facts are the same for both. They have a little bit different criteria and such. Okay, so to the project at hand. This is a proposal to redevelop 1404 South Lincoln Avenue. It's commonly known as the Zeta Tau Alpha Sorority House, into an 18-unit apartment building. This parcel that the building is on, I should also mention the ZTA house is a local historic landmark. The parcel that this property is on is zoned R7 University Residential, and R7 is a very specific zoning district, and I'm going to, and I promise this is the last time I do it, but I'm going to read verbatim from the zoning ordinance. So try and stay with me. But the R7 district was designed for very specific purposes, so I think they are relevant to go over those so that we can get an understanding of what R7 is there for. So, the R7 district is intended to provide areas in proximity to the University of Illinois for dormitories and rooming houses, which are occupied primarily by students, to ensure the longevity of the architectural character and use of these existing buildings, and to protect nearby low-density residential districts from incompatible developments. Now, in the R7 district, the apartments are not allowed by right, but residential planned unit developments are allowed. So that is why this case is being brought here today. In a related case, which happened about 2 hours ago, there was an application by Mr. Moulin for a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Preservation Commission for exterior work that is planned as part of this development. And a certificate of appropriateness is needed for certain types of work that is done to the exterior of landmark buildings. That approval for the certificate of appropriateness was granted by the Preservation Commission. Okay, so the proposed development, as I mentioned, it would be for an 18-unit apartment building, and that would have 40 beds, so it would have 40 residents. You can see the layout of the site on the plans that we've passed out and that are in your Plan Commission memo. And let's just take a look, just for a little bit of background. So the site is located. Let's go full screen on this. Okay, so this site is located just south of Pennsylvania Avenue on Lincoln Avenue, but the building itself is actually more oriented towards Vermont. There's sort of a large area on the west side that's got some green space in this existing L-shaped drive there. There is an original, the eastern part of the building is the 1928 original building, and then there was a pretty substantial addition put on the western side in 1963. Let's see. Okay. So you can kind of see that, or you can see that in the site plan. So existing building from the 1920s, 1963 addition here on the west. Then there was also there's another addition from the 80s that's proposed to be removed here on the southeast part of the site, and then there's a kitchen addition that I also believe is from the 80s. That's on the northeastern part of the site. Now the exterior of the building is in pretty good condition, and that would be repaired and restored. But the interior would require extensive repair and remodeling. So the house has been vacant since 2010. There's been vandalism and just general neglect over the years. The first floor of the building would be handicap accessible, and as part of this proposal there would be 2 accessible ramps installed on the property. So you can see one here coming from the southeastern proposed parking lot up to the main entrance of the original building. There is also a ramp here on the western side to access the 1963 addition. You'll note the L-shaped driveway would be removed, and in its place there would be a parking lot that would have 17 parking spaces, including 1 handicap space. The access off of Lincoln Avenue would be closed, and then access would just be taken off of Vermont Avenue. And this access drive on Vermont would be widened to 20 feet to meet the standards of the zoning ordinance to allow for 2-way traffic. Did want to point out, initially on the plans that were sent out, there's a proposal to also widen the access drive on the southeastern, the existing drive on the southeastern part of the site. But that proposal is to just leave it the width that it is right now, as it's only serving 2 parking spaces and then the garbage and recycling service. There'd be a walkway that would be built around the northern part of the building that you can see on the site plan. So it connects from the west side of the building up around the north, and then over to the east side of the building. That would allow access to the existing patio that's back there. In addition, there would be parking for 20 bicycles installed on the southwestern part of the 1963 addition. There'd also be air conditioner condensing units installed throughout around the exterior of the building, and then landscaping throughout the site. In terms of adjacent land uses, you can see a breakdown of that in Exhibit A and on page 2 of the staff memo. I'm not going to go through all those, but just to say that to the west there's university residence halls, and then there's a fraternity to the north and some single-family homes to the east and to the south. With respect to the comprehensive plan, you can see on Exhibit C that the future land use for, oops, okay, can't do that. Oh, it's not a PDF. Okay, so here's the site in this hashed area. So the future land use, all this stuff that's sort of light, on my screen it's pink, on that screen it's yellow. So the yellow stuff is labeled as this residential urban pattern. And then also there's some notes. I think only one of the notes would pertain to this property, and that's to have new development that respects traditional physical development pattern. In addition, the planned unit development would help meet several goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. I will not go through all of those, but they are detailed on page 3 in the staff memo. Now, with all planned unit development cases, we like to look at how well a development would meet with the goals of the planned unit development ordinance, which is, again, in section 13 of the zoning ordinance. And again, I will not go through all of those, but they are detailed in the memo. And I will say that the staff's analysis is that the proposed PUD is consistent with goals 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 9 of the PUD ordinance. Section 13.3 of the zoning ordinance also outlines the requirements for a planned unit development. And to be considered for a planned unit development, a proposed development needs to have a gross site area of at least 1/2 acre, and it needs to meet at least one of the 4 criteria that are outlined in the zoning ordinance. This proposed PUD meets 2 of the 4 criteria. It's also on a lot that's greater than 1/2 acre, so it meets that criteria. And the 2 of the 4 necessary criteria are conservation and unique development. Conservation, because this development would restore, rehabilitate, and protect an Urbana local historic landmark. And a unique development, because this would be a high-quality rehabilitation project in an infill location, and it would restore this unique historic resource in Urbana and allow it to be used for decades to come. As I mentioned in the introduction, planned unit developments offer some flexibility to developers to relax some of the zoning and development regulations. And in this case, the applicant requests flexibility for the number of required parking spaces, for allowing parking in the front yard, and then based on the updated plan that you all have received tonight, there's our requests for flexibility in parking lot design, and I can run through those in a minute. First of all, with respect to the number of required parking, the zoning ordinance would require, given the unit mix for this building, the zoning ordinance says that 23 parking spaces are required, and the proposed project would have 19 spaces, which is 1 fewer than on the previous plans that you had seen. But the idea here is to preserve, let me pull up that plan again. So on the previous plans, actually, oops, I have better detail of that. So, okay. Detail B. Okay, so on the previous plan, there were 3 spaces in the proposed parking area on the southeastern part of the building. In this plan, there are just the 2 spaces here, so the 1 handicap space and then the other. So that's where the parking went down by 1 space. And the idea is that there's an existing tree right here that the applicant would like to preserve. So so that's in a spot where the previously proposed parking space was. So it's a trade-off between a parking space and then preserving the tree, and they would like to be able to preserve that tree. Okay, so with respect to the request to reduce the number of required parking spaces from 23 to 19, we have observed an overall reduced demand for parking in student developments in recent years, especially developments that are close to the university. This site is right next to the university. It's well served by transit, and it's easy to walk to the university. You're also close to downtown Urbana there. So residents would be less likely to need a car than, say, if this development were out on the southeast side of Urbana. And when this was an active sorority house, there were anywhere between 45 and more than 60 students that were living here. And they sort of had an ad hoc parking area in that L-shaped drive, which, looking at old aerial photos, you could fit probably 18 cars in there. So previously, about 18 spaces worked for 60 plus residents. So we feel that reducing the number of residents down to 40 and providing about the same number of parking spaces, actually one more, it's not unreasonable to think that would be enough parking to serve the residents that are there. In addition, the applicant's proposing to provide twice the number of parking spaces, of bike parking spaces that are required. So our ordinance would require, 10 spaces, I guess 9.5, but that gets rounded up to 10 it would require 9 for the 18 units, but that would get rounded up to 10 because you can't really have a space for one bike. And they're proposing to provide 20 spaces. There was, let's see. Oh, you may recall that the planning staff did a study of multifamily residential buildings in West Urbana and near campus. I believe we had 173 buildings that were represented in that survey, and we found that the overall demand for parking was about 0.42 spaces per bedroom, which is less than the rate that is being proposed here, which is 0.475. So again, we think it would be reasonable to assume that parking supply would be adequate. In addition, on September 25th, the applicant held a public outreach meeting in West Urbana at the Unitarian Universalist Church, where the neighborhood was invited to come and hear about the plan. And at that meeting, there was some discussion about parking, but attendees really did not seem to have any concern at the time about the proposal to have 20 spaces, and they seemed most happy that the number of residents there would be reduced from 60 down to 40. Okay, enough about parking. Let's move on to talk about the setbacks. So the parking, let's see. Sorry, more parking, because the parking is in the setback. Okay. Okay, so the setback for this site is 25 feet. So everything, including parking and buildings and things, are supposed to be set back 25 feet. The parking that's proposed here is set back 15 feet from the property line. But really, the purpose, the zoning ordinance in residential districts has sort of an, I don't know, it seems kind of an odd way to calculate the front yard setback. It says 15 feet, so the required setback is 15 feet or the average of the setback along the block, whichever is greater, but no more than 25 feet. So it varies, the setback varies even within the same zone. It varies based on what else is built along whatever street you happen to be on. This block only has 3 buildings. They're all set back at least 25 feet, so the required setback here is 25 feet. Now, the reason that sort of odd setback requirement is in the zoning ordinance is to provide for a consistent street wall of building based on building setbacks. It really was not designed to, to address parking in the setback in any way. But since it is a setback requirement and the zoning ordinance says no parking in the setback, you can get into situations like this where you have to address it. You have to address it in some way. So the applicant is asking for some flexibility to allow parking within the setback, and it is setback 15 feet. So in another R7 zone, parking could be allowed 15 feet away, and it would be okay. But this is the situation is what it is. Also, on this site, because with this new parking lot, they've fit pretty much as many parking spaces as you could get onto the site to try and come close to meeting the minimum parking requirements. The parking kind of has to be within that setback. If you pushed it out of the setback, you'd lose 4 or 5 spaces, and then you'd have sort of a trade-off. There's kind of a trade-off between, do you allow parking in the front yard setback, or do you say it's got to be out of the yard, but then reduce the number of parking spaces on the site? So it's sort of an inverse relationship there. Okay, so I mentioned that there were a couple of other a couple of other areas of flexibility that were added to the new site plan, and those are detailed in the bubbled area labeled A, which I'll zoom in on it in a second here, and then also in the area labeled C. So let me pull up those if I can. Okay. So this is really zoomed in, which is good. Okay. Well, I don't need to full screen that. You can see what's being proposed here. So on the plans, the parking spaces are listed at 16 foot 6 inches. So that's the space from the edge of the parking space over to the curb. Now the zoning ordinance requires parking spaces to be 18 foot 6 inches. The reason for that is 18 foot 6 inches is a good size to fit most most vehicles that people might have. But what that also includes is, so if you imagine if you have a parking lot that's just fully paved, if they have the concrete wheel stops where you can pull your car up to the wheel stop, those wheel stops are set back a couple of feet from the edge of the parking space. So effectively what you have is a 16 foot 6 inch parking space with the concrete wheel stop, and then you have 2 feet of overhang. So what's being proposed here is it's shown as 16 foot 6 inches, but then you'll also see down here there's some detail that says 18 foot 6 inches because they are proposing a curb to be installed here, and then there is 2 feet of overhang, which is just overhanging a grass area. So effectively it's the same size parking space, it's just being done in a way that we don't see all that often. I did ask our engineering staff if they saw any issues with this. They said there were no issues with that. I also consulted our engineering staff about detail C. So I mentioned that initially in the initial plans that you received, this driveway on the southeastern part of the site was proposed to be widened to 20 feet, which would meet the required standard for a two-way access drive serving a multifamily building. But essentially what you have here is an access drive just serving 2 parking spaces plus the garbage and the recycling area. So really the driveway doesn't need to be any wider than what you would expect for, say, a single-family home or a duplex, which we allow to be as narrow as 9 feet. But I guess since it's serving the garbage area too, you want to make sure that there's room for garbage trucks. And the applicant did contact the garbage hauler that they plan to use if this is approved, and they said they would have no problem getting their trucks back there to serve that area. So those 2 items that were not in the initial memo are now being requested in terms of zoning flexibility. Okay, the criteria, let's see. Okay, so the criteria of approval for planned unit developments are listed on page 7 of your memo. To go along with the theme of the night, I'm not going to go through them verbatim or one by one, but to summarize what's in the memo, staff feels that the proposal meets all of the criteria for a planned unit development. I did want to point out, though, under the 5th criteria, I did want to point out the recommended design features that the project is incorporating. So they're incorporating screening along the eastern side of the property and in parking areas. They're including landscaping around, including trees and shrubs around the parking areas and around the bicycle parking areas. They're removing an access drive from Lincoln Avenue, which will reduce the number of access points to the site. They're providing twice the amount of required bicycle parking. They will be repairing existing materials to maintain the high aesthetic qualities of the building. They will be providing accessible entrances to the building and making the first floor units accessible. The architectural design, while existing, needs to be maintained and preserved, and they will be preserving the building's architectural features. And then under tree preservation, it says in the memo they'd be preserving 4 of the 5 existing trees, but again, if allowed to reduce the parking by 1 more space, they would be preserving all 5 of the existing trees on site. So I mentioned earlier the public input meeting. Did want to point out there were other questions besides just parking, but people were interested in learning about the project timeline, about the level of work that would need to be put into the building. They did ask about handicap accessibility. They asked about public transit access to the site. They wanted to know what the projected rent would be, the unit mix, and then they just had some general zoning questions for staff. And overall, the attendees seemed positive about the project, and there was nobody at that meeting that voiced opposition to it. In addition, I received a phone call from a neighborhood resident named Susan Taylor, and she did say she was concerned about parking. She thought that the proposal included too much parking. That concludes my report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. The Plan Commission, in both of these cases, you have the usual options. You can recommend approval of the preliminary and final development plans as attached. You can recommend approval, including any conditions that you'd like to add, or you could recommend disapproval. Staff would recommend that you forward this to City Council, or both cases, to City Council with a recommendation for approval, with, I think, with just one condition, because condition 2 in your memo was taken care of already, but the one condition would be that construction be in general conformance with the attached site plans and elevations. Again, that condition 2 for the certificate of appropriateness was obtained from the Historic Preservation Commission. So that is likely not needed as a condition anymore.
Do any members of the commission have questions for city staff?
To your knowledge, has the city ever granted a reduction in parking in the Woona neighborhood?
To my knowledge, I do not know of any time, but I've only been here since June of 2014.
Has
So
the city ever granted a waiver to put parking over a setback?
I'm not sure.
Has the city ever granted a waiver to put the other items over the setback that aren't allowed?
Such as?
Bicycle parking, condensers, dumpster.
Condensers, yes. That was one of my first variance cases that I dealt with. I don't know about the others.
And the city staff is okay with those items being over the setback, even though they're not listed in any requests?
I have asked the applicants to respond to the AC condenser unit in the front yard. That was the note that I passed them. And the trash being screened, yes, should be requested as a waiver. But because it is screened and because of the constrained site, in order to reuse the building, yes, we would be in support of that waiver.
Any other questions for city staff? Now we'll move into the public input part. I will ask petitioners or the applicant to approach to speak first. That is the person bringing the petition. Please be sure to sign in and tell us your name.
Yes, good evening. I'm Pierre Moulin. I'm the new owner of the former Sorority, the former ZTA. I purchased it last August. It has just been 6 weeks ago. The reason I purchased it is I love to renovate old houses. I live in this neighborhood myself. I've been here for 21 years. This is one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen in Urbana. The exterior is just wonderful, but the interior is a complete disaster. It has been vacant for 7 years. It has been vandalized. There are graffitis all over the place. There are pipes that have been ripped off. It would be a perfect movie, a perfect place to shoot a Norman Bates movie. It really, really is decaying. And so I view this as really the opportunity to do something very nice with it. It has been on the market for at least 2 years. The previous developers had that approached this house had a variety of ideas for it, but none of them was economically feasible. Like continue to use as a fraternity, for instance, did not work. So this is, I think, the only way, the most promising way to keep the life of this building and to make it a bit nicer, accessible, to enhance it in different ways. So I'm very happy about the work that my architects have done to use the existing resources to do the best job we can. The number of residents would, has been pointed out by Kevin, would actually go down. We try to find the best trade-off between parking spaces and preserving trees and so on and the zoning. And I hope that this project can be completed by August 1st. The plan is to have tenants in this building that would be UIUC faculty, staff, students, and so it would really contribute to the spirit of this area, which is an area that caters mostly to university people and people who are affiliated with the neighborhood. So if you have any question, I'll be most happy to answer it.
Any questions?
In the last few years, we've had lots of projects come before this committee and others in the Woona neighborhood, and many of those have asked for a reduction in parking. It's never been granted, and quite frankly, you were the most vocal opponent against any reduction in parking. Other than your economic interest in this project, how has your philosophy on the amount of parking changed?
Yeah, I think the picture we look at speaks for itself. This is an existing site. There's an existing footprint of the building. One needs to find a trade-off between the number of parking spaces and the greenery. And that's basically the best compromise we can find. No matter how we look at it, there has to be a compromise because we have to fit with an existing building.
Okay, I should have started with, I greatly applaud your efforts to try to do this, because I walked through this building with developers who would never touch it. So thanks for trying. Just as a matter of point, I have to take exception to your explanation of parking. And if you'd like, I have emails you've written to the city, meeting minutes, where, can I read some?
I don't know if it's relevant. Of course,
It's,
in
it's
general,
relevant because you're asking for something that you're so opposed for everyone else asking for.
there's only
And I don't understand how
Okay.
your
The-
philosophy has changed.
There's only one case that was last year where the idea was to build a gigantic building, which of course had gigantic parking needs, and this is a completely different scenario. This was building something that was totally unfit for the neighborhood. Here we're working with an existing building, which is a beautiful building, which fits totally the neighborhood. There's not even any
I
comparison.
agree, and I hope you can save it. This is an email you wrote to the city on May 19th. It says, empirical observations suggest that there are at least 2 cars per 3 students in the neighborhood, hence the proposed building. This does not even take into account the parking spaces needed for the visitors of these tenants. The developer has made a misleading claim that fewer parking spaces are needed nowadays. That's the claim you're making.
Yeah.
So according to your philosophy, this building should have 27 spaces.
Well,
That's what you said.
I'm looking at reality. So the reality is, on one side, the existing site, again, cannot be compared with a new construction that you're referring to. Number 2, let's hear the neighborhoods, the neighbors. Okay,
We
the
did, that
people
was
who-
you. You're the neighbor.
Yeah,
We
I'm
heard
s-
you.
Yeah, I'm saying the people, I'm a neighbor, and so of course as a neighbor, I'm opposed to a large quantity of cars flooding my streets, and it causes obvious concerns and dangers. Here, the neighbors have spoken. We had a neighborhood meeting on September 25th, and as you have heard, there was one requirement to actually have less parking on site. There isn't anyone who said you need to add more parking on site. So it's not even an issue as far as the neighbors are concerned.
Has your opinion on the number of bedrooms in a unit changed? Because again, you objected to having 3 and 4 bedroom units in the last project that came before the Plan Commission. And your
The-
project has more than half of them as 3 bedroom units.
There's a mix of studios, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. It's approximately, if I remember well, half the units are 3 bedroom, and the goal is to cater to the population that lives in this neighborhood. There are single people, there are couples, there are graduate students who often come into say pairs, or occasionally there could be 3 students who live in one apartment. So I feel there's a nice mix of units, and I'm happy of that choice, and my architects, I think, have done a great job partitioning the building so that it can accommodate all different sort of things. In a brand new building, as you know, you can decide, I want all 2 bedroom units and so on. Here, we're trying our best to match an existing historical home, and there has to be a mix of units, some smaller, some larger.
So your opinion on having units with more bedrooms has changed?
No, it all depends on the construction. So again, you seem to be talking about a brand new construction last year. I'm talking about reusing a house designed by Joseph Warrior, okay, which was a sorority, which has odd shapes and so on. There has to be a mix of units in it. It's just unrealistic to think otherwise.
Okay. That's it. I'm done.
Other questions?
Also related to parking, I think you're optimistic about the number of cars that are going to be, that your tenants are going to have. Comparing what you want with the 1980s sorority, I think there are going to be more cars, especially the kind of tenants that you hope for. I think there are going to be a lot more cars. I also expect that in the 80s, when it was a sorority, that people were parking on the streets. Also, there are no services nearby, like a grocery store. Okay, there are some restaurants. Work is within walking distance or easy bus rides. But I really think that people are going to want and need them more than the parking spaces allow for.
Okay. So about the, let's start maybe with the eating possibility. So there's the FAR and PAR residence halls, which are just across Lincoln. So many potential residents for this building would be people who were at those dorms before, and they are allowed to use the facilities of FAR and PR for eating. So this is already a segment of the market that just for eating, for instance, might either want to cook home or just cross the street and eat where they were eating before. About the transportation, there's 3 bus lines that run next to this place. I would think the students or faculty or staff who wants to live there would be often people who work on South Campus, so they would just walk to work, just like I do. I live half a mile north of there, and I have a 20-minute walk to my office every day. I think it's very comfortable, very healthy, and I would think many residents there would do the same. Of course, presumably there would be people who work on South Campus, maybe more so than North Campus.
Okay, so now there are 4 handicap spaces available?
There's 2 handicap spaces.
2. Okay. What if none of your tenants require a handicap spot? What will happen to those spaces then?
I've asked that question to my architects. What is the law? As I understand, we need to verify. Then the vacant spots that are next to the handicap spots can be used also for parking. So it would increase effectively by 2 the number of parking spaces. This is assuming there's no handicapped person who lives there.
I can answer that question if you want. So you're required to have accessible spots as part of your parking count, but until you have a tenant that requires one of those spots, if they're large enough, they can be used as regular parking spots. So until there's a tenant that needs one, they don't have to be used as accessible spots.
Do you know yet if you're going to charge for those parking spots and an idea of how much? And how's that going to compare to getting a tag to park on the streets?
Okay. I would plan to charge an amount that is similar to the cost of a parking permit for the city of Urbana. I think making it either much cheaper or much more expensive is very counterproductive. If you make it cheaper, everyone wants to bring a car. If you make it much more expensive, no one wants to park there, and they all want to park on the street. So I think a reasonable model would be charging, say, $15 or $20 per month, which is comparable to the cost of a permit.
Are there any other questions for the petitioner? Okay, I have none. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. Have they decided what they're going to do about the AC units in the front yard setback?
She's asking if you have an answer to the AC setback question.
My name is Kim Smith. We would like to put them behind the building if possible. There are limitations on the length that you can take these condensing lines, and we have a concern about that. So that's why we had shown them where they were. They're back within that 15 feet, not the 25 feet, and we would screen them with vegetation to hide them. If at all possible, we'd like them all to be back behind the building. But you're looking at a great distance for those condensing lines to go. And you can't put them on the roof. The Historic Preservation Commission or ordinance will not allow that.
So would you like to request the waiver so that if you cannot relocate them, that they would be permitted to be as they are currently shown?
We would like to request that if that's possible. And we will do our best to put them behind the building.
Question?
I walked around the building, and it's a pretty tight spot there that you have the garbage dumpster recycling. Is that really going to be enough space? Because I mean, it's a very narrow trail.
Mr. Mulan talked with his garbage hauler and talked to him about that, and they did not see an issue with that. Am I correct? That was a question that came up, and we had him address that with his hauler.
If there are no other questions, then thank you.
Are we asking architectural questions now? Or
Yeah.
are we doing that later?
Well, you can come up. Yeah. We'll try and answer.
If you got the folks here, let's do it.
Sign in. I got one.
Katie Hudson.
Okay. I'll preface this with, I think there are probably 3 people in the room that know how hard this is to do, so you did a good job. I really just have 2 architectural issues to speak to. And I assume this is going to be an R2 use group. So everybody needs 2 ways out. Our accessible people have one way out, but they also need another, at least, place to go, so they need an area of refuge. In this case, it's going to be one in each of the enclosed stairwells. And I see absolutely no way on the north stairwell you're going to be able to fit that in, so the stairway is going to need to be reconfigured somehow. I don't know the geometry of the stair on the southwest part, but maybe there's headroom to go under the stair, I don't know. So you might be able to get one in there, but without some major reworking of the east end of that stair, I don't know how that's going to work. And the other one that's a little more problematic, and unless you've done this several times, this kind of an obscure part of the building code, that you got lots of rooms that aren't big enough. So the building code states that in a studio apartment, you need a room that is exclusive of the kitchen that's a minimum of 220 square feet. So I think your studio apartment on the southeast end probably works. I don't have a scale, so I can't measure anything. I don't think the other 3 come close. In addition to that, in the same section of the building code, in any unit besides a efficiency unit, you have to have a room exclusive of the kitchen that's 120 square feet, and I think you have a lot of living rooms that don't meet that. So, yeah, and since you can't count the kitchen in that space, for instance, in this one I got here, 3B, I don't think that comes probably close to meeting that 120 square feet. Maybe it does, but I can't scale this, so I don't know. So, while, again, I applaud your efforts to try to do this, I think that there's some major code issues that sort of have to be addressed and reworked in this plan, because it won't pass the building code the way it is. So, but again, I really applaud your effort because I know how hard it is to do this. So, okay, thanks.
You have any response or questions?
Just that it's a schematic design still, and we can maybe look at some of those issues.
Andrew, I agree with you. This looked like it was. I'm glad that somebody's tackling a project to save this beautiful building, and I grant you that there's a lot of trying to retrofit an old new codes in an old building that weren't quite designed that way. Is there any flexibility in these building plans to allow for something of this For a historic building?
If this involves questions that involve the petitioner, that's probably appropriate now. But if I don't want to creep into discussion, because we may want to ask these questions in our discussion when we get to that.
I'll save it for that.
You okay with that? Okay. Any other questions for the petitioner? If not, then thank you, and I'll ask if there's anybody else who wants to speak in favor of this proposal.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Louise Cooney. I own the historic house at 801 West Indiana. It's the southwest corner of Indiana and Busey. Overall, I am here to support Professor Moulin, and the concern in the neighborhood about what will happen to this building long term is a major issue. And with Pierre, we have a neighbor who is clearly invested in the community, who is active in working for preservation, and I believe that his motives are pure and historically driven. However, I'm concerned about the process, and that's what I came here to discuss. I live in a different world. I work for the Joint Commission. We write standards for hospitals so that when you go in the hospital, you can make sure that you or your family member have sterilized surgical instruments and, of course, the building codes for hospitals for life safety and other things. I'm just concerned from that standpoint, not particular to this project, but particular generally for any project where we have a planned unit development. I just don't see that, to my eye, the standards, the criteria for approving planned unit developments just don't seem very clear to me. It just seems like there's a wide range of judgment in these. And this is not a criticism. I see this as an opportunity for improvement. I would like the committee perhaps to consider discussing how we could get some more specific criteria so that everything isn't left to judgment. I have 800 hospital surveyors. I can't send them into a hospital and just let them use their judgment. They'd be doing one thing in one hospital, another thing in another hospital. This is a great degree of judgment, in my view, left open here. I have to say that I'm even more concerned after being here that it gets to this point of approval, and this is both a preliminary and final approval, and there's a possibility that some of the room sizes aren't even large enough. I don't understand how it gets to this point. And again, if there were some more specific criteria for these types of projects, I think that might be beneficial. What I'm concerned about is that we could wind up with someone that doesn't have pure motives like Professor Moulin, and that might want to do something else in the 800 block. The 800 block in the Lincoln-Busey, called the Lincoln-Busey Corridor, has been, for lack of a better term, under attack since I moved in 6 years ago. It's been one thing after another. So what if someone comes back after this, let's say this is approved, and someone else comes back and we have criteria that are rather open, and they say, well, you improved this project, let's approve this other one as well. So I would encourage the committee to use this as an opportunity either today or at a future meeting to review the criteria that are given here and ensure that when something is brought to the committee or approved by the committee, that there are clear criteria that are not open to wide ranges of judgment and that would always be beneficial to people that have invested heavily in their homes.
So I just want to clarify, you are speaking in support of the petition?
I am.
But with a side comment about the clarity of the process.
criteria.
Yeah, I'm also a site visitor for a different academic organization, so I understand what you're talking about. I've also gone to JCO It is a bit different, but so I just want to clarify
Yes.
that you
for
are
this
speaking on
process-
behalf of the petition.
Absolutely.
But you have concerns about the clarity of the criteria.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then, I'm a nurse with, a master's degree. I obviously don't have the expertise to speak to things like Mr. Fell is speaking to, and I would hope that, we would be able to depend on this committee to ensure that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, are there any other questions for her? Thank you. Are there any other people who want to speak in support of the proposal? Not hearing any, are there any people who wish to speak in opposition to the proposal? Not hearing any, then I will make sure I've checked all my P's and Q's here. I believe we now can close the public hearing component. And,
We could allow a summary from the applicant.
Oh,
team if
sorry.
they would like.
Thank you. I told you to check me if I skipped something. So, does the applicant wish to make a summary or respond to any other comments?
Oops. Yes, okay, thanks for listening and asking questions. I think the only thing I want to emphasize in my summary is we're trying to find a way to reuse a wonderful building. It is an existing building which has lots of issues. It is a history. There are trade-offs that are absolutely necessary. If we don't want those trade-offs, we just leave the building as it is and it will die and create huge problems for the neighborhood. I think we are trying our best to find a good solution for this building and to make sure that the neighbors, the immediate neighbors, are proud of this building, and I think they are. And I want to do everything I can to make that happen. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Now I will close then the public input and we'll move to discussion. So, you had a question earlier.
Thank you. First, I have spent quite a bit of time rehabbing an old home, and I would respectfully disagree with Mr. Garcia's judgment or assessment of the exterior of this building as being good. I'd be inclined to call it fair. I recognize hard work when I see it, and a lot of it. Turning to the interior, I'd like to, as best I can remember, repeat my question or about strict adherence to current building current requirements, building code requirements for historic buildings. Is there any flexibility in that regard?
I'll do my best to answer your question, although I may not get all of it totally right. So there are two paths around some building code issues. One is there's an existing structures code, and to be honest, I don't know if Urbana has that code because I've never had to use it in Urbana. We've used it in Champaign, and that does allow some flexibility with certain things. I don't believe room size is one of them. And there are some exemptions for historic structures, but again, I don't think this is something that would be exempt under that code either.
I'm holding my discussion till others have had their say.
I also noticed the really small living rooms and wondered if they would even be marketable. Your concern with parking and how Pierre was not happy with the previous, well, I assume you were talking about the construction on the corner of Lincoln and Nevada, Oregon?
Correct.
Yeah.
It was a new building.
Yeah, I do think it's different. A new construction where they went through 2 tries of trying to get it right. And apparently they eventually did. But they had choices there. I don't think there is many choices in an existing building.
Well, again, I want to preface this with, I hope this project goes forward, because I want to see it happen. I don't think that, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I personally can't vote to approve this the way it's drawn, because it does not meet the building code, and I think that is an essential part of this. I also think that part of the process of being able to meet the building code is going to reduce the amount of parking required, because we're going to lose some bedrooms in this building. So maybe the parking comes into compliance. The way the parking is set up over the setback on the south side, to me, isn't necessarily a real issue. There are, to be perfectly honest, most communities, when they have a piece of ground like this that's on a corner, you pick one side for a front yard and you pick the other side for a side yard. And in this case, the front yard would be on Lincoln and Vermont would be a side yard, and everything would be in compliance. So if it was just a matter of our zoning ordinance being worded differently, maybe more in line with what I will say most other communities do, there would be no issues. We need no variances there. So in terms of that kind of aspect of the project, I really don't have a problem with it. So my main objection of not being able to vote for it is we have building code issues that I think have to be solved before those things can happen.
Mr. Chair, when it's appropriate, I just wanted to be sure that I address that issue for the commission. So let me know when it's appropriate on building code.
Do you mind, would you like?
Please do.
Yeah, would you please?
I just wanted to let the commission know that at this stage in the process, the applicant is seeking approval of a more general plan. We do not, nor do we want to, require building permits level drawings at this stage, because those, as Andrew knows, are very expensive to produce, and they just want to know if they even can go forward to that stage. So at the building permit stage, absolutely, they will need to meet building code unless they seek some variances through a totally separate process. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that we do not require that level of drawing at this stage, and that they will ultimately need to meet building code. So I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that fine point.
That clarification helps, thank you.
Well, I guess my point in bringing this up is that in order to meet the building code, these plans have to change a lot. And it's going to change the number of bedrooms, it's going to change the number of units, it may change the mix of how many 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms there are. I don't see any way that a resulting plan that's conforming to the building code can be anywhere close to what is given to us here.
Do you think that there would be more or fewer bedrooms?
Fewer. In a off-the-cuff answer, they're going to lose probably 3 or 4 at least. I mean, there are other ways to do it. It depends on how. There's so many variables that. So we have, this project has 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms and efficiency. So it's way more economical to build a 3-bedroom apartment than a 2 and a 1. So maybe their solution is to make all of this 3-bedroom apartments, because then they lose 4 kitchens, and so they have space to put things. But no matter what they do, things have to move a lot. And it's also a little less problematic to me. Is there other, I mean, I didn't look through this for all the building code things that would need to be addressed, but there's some things that are obvious that are going to mean walls have to move, and an area of refuge and a stair is kind of a big thing, and you don't have a choice, and it doesn't fit.
Even in a historic,
No,
building?
unless the city has adopted amendments to the building code, the only way to get a ruling or an opinion change is to appeal it to the State Code Review Board, which I suppose they could do. They have a slim chance of winning any of those arguments.
Other discussion?
My concern has just been parking. I do think that anything that goes in there is going to need parking. So, to me, the option is, what else could happen? And to me, this is the best option.
I'll follow up. I agree this is the best option. I think this is a great use for this building. And again, I really hope it happens. And I think once the plan is massaged to meet at least on the surface the building code, I think they'll have probably the parking that they need. I also want to just express an opinion that I think staff and the community needs to be aware of, is that in this neighborhood, we've never, ever, ever granted a waiver on parking. And if we do this, doors open. So community members have a much less opportunity to come voice in opposition to the next developer that wants, in this case, it was 85% of the parking. We lost one, so it's 20% less parking. So the next time a developer comes in this neighborhood and says, I want 20% less parking, you did it for him, do it for me.
Well, I think rationale is that this is a historic reuse as opposed to a brand new development, and that's pretty different. I think so.
I would disagree.
Okay. All right.
Because it's different how, because this, and again, this is, I don't want to speak about this specific project, but in any project, you meet the parking requirement by putting in fewer bedrooms. That's part of the algebra problem you do when you start a project
Sure,
like this.
sure.
I can only fit in
Arithmetic.
10 parking spots, I only get 20 bedrooms. That's the part of the algebra you do, and that's the same algebra you do for this project. Okay, I got, 19 parking spaces, I can get 38 bedrooms. So that's what we do. So it can be done, it's just a matter of where the compromise happens.
But you think that there might be fewer that
Yeah, I honestly think that if this plan gets revised to meet the room criteria, parking is probably in compliance. I can't say that, but I would guess it would be.
Yeah. I've held back, so I'll just go ahead and throw my 2 cents in. When I look at the building, where it's located, and I'm thinking about other conversations in just couple years I've been on the commission, we want intensive residential infill development in this area. And when there have been previous discussions, I'm very sensitive to the WUNA issues about parking. I wouldn't want to violate that too much, but I'd lean more on the side of, I'm glad they doubled the bicycle parking, because I really don't see anybody but students living here. They say faculty will live here. The only faculty I could see living in a building like this would be a new assistant professor hired in their first year who's waiting to buy a house. Right, so you might get somebody like that. If you are anticipating families moving in, then I share the concerns about where are they going to go to the grocery store, where are they going to do these other things. For that, there will need to be at least one vehicle for the family. If the assumptions are these are primarily students and graduate students, a lot of them will bus, walk, and use the bikes. So I liked the increase in the bicycle. I'm very sensitive to the issue you're talking about, setting a precedent. And whatever precedent we set, we won't see for just this one development.
I'm wondering how we can grant a waiver if we don't have the final plans.
Well, so the way this works is, as a plan unit development, there's this 2 stages that we're hearing concurrently tonight. The preliminary, so if this was a larger project with multiple buildings, let's say, they would come in and say, yeah, we kind of want to do this and put the building here and the building there and the parking will be in this area. And then, so it's a different evaluation criteria because you don't have all the details. They want to get the green light to create those details. So then you have the final planned unit development where you have much more of the detail. You have, well, this will be about that many units, and this is how much parking is needed, and this is where that's going to be. But it's the building permit where, you know, the rubber really meets the roads. All the calculations are done. All of the details that Andrew was talking about are calculated. So the set, instead of being however many pages this is, 12 or 5 or 6 pages or so, is, you know, a new construction building, maybe 20 sheets or 30 sheets of giant pages. So it wouldn't be possible to take that through this process, because what we want to do is give a developer an indication on whether or not what they're requesting is okay conceptually, so that then they can spend the money to produce those really detailed drawings. So we as staff have to review those building permits and look at the building code in order to ensure that it's meeting the letter of the law. That gets really detailed. So it's not really possible to have that be come to this body, because that is, you know, more of a black and white process. Does it meet the code? Yes or no? Whereas this is more of a discussion process, because it's about the project as a whole. Is it a good project? Should it be approved? Knowing that you've got the regulations backing everything, and ultimately every regulation does need to be met unless it's being waived here.
Chris?
Thank you. Is there only 2 parking spots? Are there only 2 parking spots completely within the 25-foot setback? It might be 2 parking spots and then parts of 2 others.
Yeah, that's correct. Looks like there's just 2, or there are 2 that are fully within.
If those were taken out of the if those were removed, could this project go forward?
Well, if any part of the parking is within the setback, a waiver would be needed. So, as I described during my report, what you're really looking at here is just a trade-off between these 2 waivers that are being requested. So, do you want to grant a larger waiver for reducing the parking so that you can better meet or fully meet the setback requirement, or do you think the setback requirement is not that, you know, is not as big of an issue, and you allow the parking as they presented it?
Yes.
I would just like to mention that I was at the public meeting that you had at the Unitarian Church, and there were quite a few neighbors there, including, I know, one family that lives just south of this project. And I think that if any of them were really concerned, they'd either be here or would have had some form of communication. It's not like, at all, like the other project where there was a packed house complaining.
Are we ready for a motion, or we still need to discuss some more?
I'd like to discuss some more. I have a couple thoughts. I can't vote to approve this the way it is, because even though this is, we'll say, a preliminary plan, it doesn't work. And to make it work, there are going to be a bunch of changes, and some of those changes are going to affect what happens on the site plan, because I think we're going to have a reduction in parking. So is it in the city's best interest, the neighborhood's best interest, our best interest, to ask for this to be presented again in a format that at least we can conceptually say that it will meet the building code? Because when we do that, we may not have a parking problem. And now we've eliminated the precedent, we might say, which I think is what the neighborhood would prefer happens. I mean, I've done this long enough that they don't want a reduction in parking for other things, and if we allow it here, the next person is going to ask for it, and we're going to have a hard time saying no to that. So I'm not going to make a motion right now, but my opinion is we should delay it. What's the right word? Continue the meeting.
Can we continue this to another meeting?
You can, but I would emphasize that the building permit review of building code is an administrative function.
Right.
It is not a function of the Plan Commission. So I just want to make that abundantly clear. That is an
Right.
administrative function. What is before you today is whether or not this project, as a whole project, meets the criteria of the planned unit development. Is it residential? Is it half an acre or more? Does it preserve the architectural features? So you really need to look at those criteria. If there's something that you want to look at in terms of a condition that might make you more comfortable, so for instance, I'm off the cuff here, if redesign of the interior results in a reduction of a need for parking, then that waiver will be removed, or something like that to make you more comfortable with a potential change to the interior. I would encourage you to think of that because, as I said, review of the building code specifics is an administrative function.
But as a point of clarification, isn't it our function to make sure that they have to build in general conformance to what we're given? And they, under the building code, they cannot do that. So they'd be in violation of our approval.
Well, it's a general conformance to the plans.
Okay.
I
Can we
mean-
get a definition then?
Well, as I think you're aware of working on other projects, Andrew, there are times when there are changes that don't have a negative impact on the exterior that we would allow because you haven't already gone to the nth degree to design a project in order to get at this stage.
I would like to point out that the condition that staff is recommending is that the construction be in general conformance with the attached site plan and elevations. We're not saying anything about the floor plans. Perhaps we should not have included them in the information that we shared because we're really not looking at that level of detail right now. For other planned unit developments, we use consistent language. We talk about site plans. Occasionally we say renderings and elevations and things of that nature. Nowhere do we ever say anything about the floor plans or the building plans because, as Lori's mentioned a few times, that gets handled at the building permitting stage.
Okay. Again, believe me, I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to make sure we do this right. So if we approve this in general conformance to the site plan as shown, and they have, we'll say, the 2 parking spaces on the west side that are completely over the setback, and then they redesign the building and find out they don't need those parking spaces, they can't take them out because they will no longer be in conformance with the site plan?
Well, that's where I said if you wanted to tweak a condition to provide a little flexibility, that's certainly something that we've done in other cases and could potentially alleviate some of your concerns.
Yes.
Similar to what Ms. Pearson was saying, I was going to mention sort of roping us back into looking at the specific criteria for approval and looking at Section 8-3 of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance. We're meeting this project, this application is consistent with the goals listed. The ones that aren't, it's sort of not applicable. So you could say that this is very appropriate. And then there was going to be, I was going to say that there was another comment I had. You had mentioned, could you restate the concern about WUNA and the parking preferences? Could you restate that? Because I had a...
Well, in general terms, there have been several projects that have come before this board and other boards in the WUNA neighborhood where a reduction in parking has been requested. That has universally been met with large voices of discontent. And as far as I know, it's never been granted before. So we just have to, part of our job as a board is decide is that's the door we want to open. The neighborhood doesn't want us to open that door.
So assuming that we can't approve for a historic case, because we might not be able to say no in the future. I guess my
Well, we-
response is that we should be able to say no.
Yeah, I don't want to speak out of turn, maybe, I mean, I don't think I am, but we can always say no, but we're going to have a much harder time saying no. Because the whole idea is we should treat everybody the same. And so when we grant this waiver here, the next person is going to say, why am I less worthy than the one you gave this to? And we're going to have to tell them why.
Yeah, the classic equality
Right.
versus neutrality issue where you want to treat everybody the same.
There are a
or
lot of
every
developers
case
that
the
hope
same,
we
but
open
every
this
case
door.
is not the same. So that would be sort of my counterpoint to that, is that not every case is the same. But, yeah, it's problematic. I think that's all I wanted to add.
If I understand correctly, too, and I'm, with all the conversation, I may have gotten a little, not sure I've got this clear. The setback is one of the big issues with parking, but I also think preservation of a tree or a few trees was also another consideration about parking. Is that true? So like, if we said, yeah, go ahead and cut down the tree, they'd be able to throw a few more parking spaces in there. That's stated rather crudely, but is that correct?
Yes, I think there's, there's a trade-off here.
Has the city arborist looked at that tree?
Not yet.
Okay, what kind and how big is it?
It's a maple tree. It's a beautiful tree. Initially, we had 20 parking spots, and I decided I would like to save the tree. At least 1/4 of one parking spot. I hate leaving a tree for parking spot.
Well, I agree with that, and I think one tangential point is that, well, I guess that tree's not in the parkway, so the arborist, so you won't have to pay for it if you cut it down, but when you cut down a tree on the city parkway, it's really expensive.
So I bring this up because you had mentioned trade-offs. And I think, again, part of the trade-off is there's historical preservation, but there's also, it's not historical necessarily, but it's still preservation in the way I think of preservation. A decision, I don't know about, I've certainly been by there many times, and just recently, I don't know over the historic nature of a tree. My own personal values are such that I would rather see a tree live than to see it cut for a parking space. But if we do that, I'm fully aware, a developer can come in later and say, you reduced a couple parking spaces, it's below this number, we want to go that way.
Well, I think that what the developer's going to say is, you reduced the parking by 20%. They're not going to say you reduced it by
Right.
3 spaces, they're going to say you reduced it by 20%, or whatever the number is. And so he's not going to ask for 20, he's going to ask for 25.
I wouldn't have any trouble saying no, depending on the circumstances.
No to,
No to a waiver of parking. In the future. Yeah. But Mr. Fell was saying that it would be hard to say that we were opening the door, and it would be hard to say no. And I'm saying it wouldn't be hard for me to say no, depending on the circumstances.
so you're saying, you're not voicing opposition to this proposal, you're voicing the opinion that it depends on the specific case.
Exactly.
Well, I'm looking for unless we want to continue discussion, I'm looking for a motion to either support the proposal or to support the proposal with amendments or to defeat the proposal.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to put forth a motion for approval of Plan Case Number 2314-PUD-17 and 2318-PUD-17 for approval.
Okay. Can I hear a second?
I second.
Okay. Can we have a roll call vote?
Oh, I'd like to also add an amendment that might be debated and separately for approval, separately to, as a condition.
Well, then, we need to hear that
Oh,
condition. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we
all
need to
right.
hear the condition, because that would be
Okay.
part of the.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. One is that I think that the recommendation was that construction be in general conformance with the site plan and elevations, but I'd also like to add that the 2 parking spots that are totally within the, totally within the 25-foot front yard setback be removed, that those shouldn't be part of the plan.
Should not be part of the.
Should not, that they shouldn't have, we shouldn't have those 2 parking spots that are within the 25-foot setback.
So you want to reduce it by 2 more? That's your,
I want to reduce the parking by those 2
Okay.
spots.
Right.
And allow the partial.
Okay, so you have one condition is to approve it, but without -2 of the parking spots as you
Yes.
specified. And do you have another condition
Well, just the one that was.
already here,
Number 1 under recommendation.
that they be in general conformance?
Right.
can I have a staff question?
Well, we have an amended motion, so does the seconder want to continue to second that friendly amendment, or?
No.
Okay. So we have the standing motion, then
Standing
sure, you
motion.
can discuss this.
Do we,
next week.
yeah, so, do I need a second to discuss, before I can discuss it, or? I
Well, if
think
you
we
go
may-
back to the original motion,
Right,
which is without any conditions whatsoever, then that has been moved and seconded. So then
Right.
you can discuss at will.
okay. So the original motion was that, and then you have introduced a condition. I just think that makes too much of a sticky wicket for me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is do we need another attachment to this? Do we need to include a waiver for the items that are over the setback that aren't allowed over the setback? Bicycle parking, condensers, dumpster?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. I guess I will, what's the right word? Amend? Amend the motion to include the ability to put the bicycle parking, the condensers, and the dumpster and dumpster enclosure over in the required setback.
Is that in addition to his?
Yes.
That's in addition to his condition.
So what we
Well-
have is the original motion, which is to recommend approval, no conditions, plus the amendments to add waivers for the dumpster, the bicycle parking, and the AC units within the front yard setback.
As long as they're screened. The AC units.
So yes, and actually the dumpsters and not the front yard, sorry. We'll get it right, but I think you understand the intent. What we need then is to understand if the person who made the motion accepts those amendments,
Yes.
and if the seconder accepts those amendments.
I'm confused. Are you saying that it's okay?
Yes, I'm saying it's okay to put those items over the setback.
Okay. I agree then.
Then the only other thing I would ask, just because we're starting to get a little confusing here.
Right.
I want to ask if anyone wants to make another amendment to that amended motion to add the condition for that general construction being, that construction be in general conformance with the attached site plan and elevations.
He introduced that with his first one. He was suggesting 2 conditions.
And the seconder did not accept those conditions.
Right. So,
Because
okay.
it's either you accept all of them or none of
None of
them.
them.
So none
Got
of
it.
them were accepted, so we're back to the original with
So we're
no
back
conditions.
to the original, so.
Plus
that
Andrew's
condition,
conditions.
And then do we want, I need, then the condition that construction be in general conformance with attached site plan elevations.
Can we start all over again?
Might help.
Well, then you would need to vote.
Just-
Um,
So,
I'd like, okay, can we start all over again?
Well, that would require a vote.
yeah. So what we
So-
have is a motion to accept a proposal to approve the two plan cases as stated, with your amendment about the setbacks, right? But we do not have the condition yet.
Correct.
So his condition about reducing parking spaces went nowhere, so far, all right, so.
So if somebody makes a friendly amendment to add the condition that construction be in general conformance, then we could
Okay.
see if the original,
Right.
I'll make that, I'll make that mandatory motion.
okay, so you're amending your original motion to add condition number 1, that construction be in general conformance with the attached site plan and elevations.
Yes.
Does the seconder agree with that addition?
Yes.
Okay. Is everyone clear then? We have,
And his amendment.
correct.
I'd like to ask, are those two parking spots part of your amendment?
No.
Ah, good. Oh, then okay, good.
Wait a minute.
Good.
They're not coming out. Those 2 parking spots are staying in.
I'm saying, they're staying in?
Yes.
Ah. Well, all right.
So, can you read back the proposal, or can I? Or we got it good enough?
Would you like me to, or you got it,
Yes,
Terry? or-
yes, please. Yes, if one of you could.
Terry has it, that's good.
I think Terry's got it best, yeah.
That the planning commission for both cases, plan case 2314-17 and plan case 2318-50-17 to the city council with a recommendation for approval with an amendment to include a waiver for the bicycle parking dumpsters and AC units within the front yard setbacks as long as they are screened.
That should actually just read setbacks.
Okay, setbacks. And condition as recommended by city staff, condition number 1 about the site plan being in general conformance.
Construction.
Or, construction.
Should construction be in general conformance with the attached site plan elevations? Okay. I think we're ready to vote then. Please take a roll call.
Mr. Fell?
Yes.
Ms. Wadrago?
Yes.
Mr. Storr?
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson?
Yes.
And Ms. Billman? Yes.
Now would be a good time to ask us when that's going to City Council, and that is going Monday.
Going Monday.
This coming Monday,
All right.
the 16th.
There is no new business. Does anyone in the audience wish to speak about anything not related to the cases that we've just discussed? Is there a staff report? No staff report. And the study session has been pulled, so we're done.